I'm not sure exactly what they would have used, but some type of.
Just as an explanation, Bill's comes from the machining world, and I come from the outboard mechanic world. So we have different points of view on these outboards. So that's why I'm asking some of these questions that I don't understand, and perhaps he looks at me like I've got three eyes about some of the questions I ask, but we'll get there.
So anyway, the cylinder is so they were all lapped in, and it was quite a, I'd call it a painful.
Why wouldn't you call
process.
lapping being the same as honing? I mean, it was.
Well, honing, you just run the hones through and then put it together and you're done.
Yeah, but I mean, lapping was a start, and they just kept simplifying it.
Well,
no,
they have to actually assemble the whole power head with the lapping material and run it in some kind of a motor.
Okay.
And then run it for X number of hours like that to work itself in. Then take it all apart and clean all that out of there and put it back together.
Jesus.
So, and all these got that. Even in the 20s, with the Alto rudder twins had the wide rings like this. They had to all do that process, and to me it was like prohibitively, time-consuming process. When if you could just grind the cylinder or run a hone through, and you want to talk a little bit about the crosshatch of honing?
If you think it's important to the discussion of this, I'd say
well,
not on this particular engine, because you're talking about they didn't do it on this engine.
We don't know.
Lapped it in.
Yeah, but I did hone this cylinder.
Well, you did, yes, but originally it was not honed; it was lapped in under a very laborious process.
So one of the myths, you run into a lot of myths in motor, motor collecting and motor performance and all that, is this crosshatch of hone. You probably heard all this crosshatching.
Yes,
okay?
yes, yeah.
And there's a faction that believes that crosshatching in the hone has everything to do with oil
getting trapped in the
grooves and all that.
Yes, right.
And that's myth.
Yeah.
The reason why you do a crosshatch with a hone, and when you look at a cylinder and you say, oh, look at that nice crosshatch pattern, it's an indicator that the hone was traveling up and down the cylinder.
Right.
Okay? And that means that the cylinder is much more uniform, because the hone stones break down, and if you just kept it in one spot,
it wouldn't work. No, they definitely deform. I've used the hone stones.
The stones are always wearing down, so you have to have that motion. And there's people that claim that particular angle of the crosshatch has everything to do with everything, but it just tells you that the cylinder is honed properly. Anyway, this cylinder is an early cylinder, so the 1909 and 1912 Evenrudes had a 2.5-inch bore, and that later one we just looked at is a 2 5/8 bore. And the parts are not interchangeable between the two. The crankcase is smaller, the cylinder flange is smaller. At some point,
keep on going.
They decided to make the bore bigger and make the whole power head just a wee bit bigger. And so the other part of where we're at with this is, of course, the crankcase is cast bronze crankcase. It comes together in two halves like this. And
did he cast them, or did he have them done?
I'm sure that if you look at the size of the facility that these early Evenrudes came out of, they had to have been done someplace.
Okay, somewhere else?
Yeah, cast someplace.
So you would say the facility was not adequate, so he jobbed that out.
And I'm going to guess that the crankshaft was forged somewhere else too.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
Because everybody, myself included, thought that everything was done in one factory.
Not in those days.
Yeah, okay.
I don't
Well,
think
no,
so.
that's good to know.
There were specialty shops. I
why
mean,
I'm
just like
asking.
today, there's specialty shops for certain things as well.
So basically, their job was to do the machining on the items that came back and the assembly.
Right. That was really what they did, and
Good.
the sales and all that. So they were, not early on in the process. Anyway. So moving on, okay, we've seen the basic power head, what's inside. Now we'll go on to, that's somewhat damaged, but it's just a bronze casting.
And it's also a bearing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's integral,
So it's
the-
integral bearing
the-
and,
yeah.
all right,
The
so.
advantage to having it all bronze is you don't need,
So how do you fix these if you're a restorer? Do you drill this out and put a bushing
you
in?
could, but you see there's not a lot of wall.
There's
It's
not
pretty-
much meat
pretty
there.
thin walled, and you can, but, you know, there's certain conventions about how thick, you know, a bushing wall should be to be able to,
So what would you do if
Press
you were
in.
fixing, if fixing this for yourself, what would you do?
If I-
Solder it, heat it and solder it?
I've done that Babbitt in those,
Yeah.
right? And that works, but you can bush them, but the bushing is a thin wall bushing, which means it really, there's not enough wall to really have a good press in.
Okay,
So you have to glue them in. So
Okay.
if you do bushing, if you bore that out and do a bushing, you should just either Loctite or epoxy
Okay.
the bushing in.
Very good.
And that works really, really well, because now
Right.
there's no stress. There's no stress on the outer thin casting trying to push it out, and there's no stress trying to collapse that
gotcha.
bushing. So
Okay.
it really is a good technique. So that's you know, basically the internals of the power head. So what does it do for a fuel mixer? Well, it's basically a very, very simple, and in the old days they called it a mixing valve. And all it is just, because it's a two-port engine, and it needs a valve, because they didn't have reeds yet, it's a poppet valve, atmospheric operated with a spring. And the fuel comes in, there's a hole drilled across the seat of the valve, so when the valve opens, the air rushes past and pulls some fuel in.
So basically the reed simplified, made
Yeah.
a fairly complicated
Right.
poppet valve
Yeah,
system
right.
into a very simple
Right.
system. But this also combined
Fuel
the,
shut off.
well, it also combined carburation along with
The
the
valving.
The valving.
Right,
So
right.
it did both.
Yeah,
So
and the other-
actually, in some ways, it's actually simpler than some of the reed
Right.
valve engines.
And the other nice thing about it is that because the fuel, let's say port, is right at the seat, so when the engine is off and the valve is shut, there's
It's off.
no fuel leakage. So it's
If-
kind of a
If your
nice.
seat and valve is in good condition.
Yeah, right, exactly, right, yeah, and we don't see too much of that. And then of course there's, well, I mean, this unscrews, we can see the valve, you know, the poppet valve, and this is actually a height adjustment that some of these earlier engines had, so that you could set the height of that poppet valve, and that's kind of a tricky.
What do you think that was? Is it a timing issue that you were setting with that height issue, or?
Well, it's almost like a throttle, right? I mean, it's really like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
throttle that, you know, if you restrict the height of that poppet, you're restricting the air fuel going in,
Yeah,
right?
okay. All right. Have you ever operated one
Oh, sure.
under action? I never
Yeah,
have.
so these engines don't have a huge speed range to them, really. So really, once you set this, I mean, once you have this set to a height that the engine seems to run well with, you just leave it alone. You don't need it. In fact, you know, the later version of that, if you can see that Elto,
Let me get that. Yep, that's.
the Elto has a similar kind of a poppet valve.
Let's get to it. It does.
And this earlier one does have a height adjustment someplace, but at some point they didn't. They gave all that up, and there was just a set at the factory. The height of that travel of that poppet valve just stayed.
So basically, the throttle control is timing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's spark timing,
Yeah, spark timing.
and that would be this lever right here.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So now that we're talking about spark timing, let's talk about the ignition system a little bit.
All right.
So the points are right here. So it's a battery ignition engine. The simplicity of it all is that, you know, the coil and the battery stay in a box, a separate box, and the timing of the ignition is just one battery box wire goes to this
So
insulated.
what's operating it though?
Yeah, we're gonna
Okay.
talk about
All
that.
right.
So,
All right.
so that's actuated by a bump in the cast iron flywheel
I can.
that hits that. So it just works very simply, and they work
So,
well.
so basically, we've got a charged coil
Yeah.
with electricity running through it,
Right.
and when this breaks, is that when the spark takes place?
There's two ways of viewing that. So a lot of people now use like a Model T Ford type spark coil,
Okay.
and that works when the points make.
Right.
Okay, then it buzzes and then the thing fires. But properly, that's not what these were offered with. They were offered just a regular coil without the buzz feature.
So they operated differently.
Yeah, they
So
operate differently.
at
So
break.
So yeah, so with the ladder system, the simple coil, is that when the point's closed, of course, the coil now would see the power. And then when the point's open, that's when the secondary
Right. The
surge
Waterman Porto has a
buzz.
buzz, was set up to use a buzz box, and it stays, the points dwell together for about 20 degrees.
Yeah.
And for a long, long time, so the spark plug is actually sparking for 20 degrees of travel.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that it ignites,
fires,
because the
right.
fuel was
Yeah.
so, not volatile, it was not like it is today.
Yeah. It's probably better though. So okay, so
Yeah.
cast iron flywheel, and you have to notice this. It's purposely made out of balance, and you can see this whole mass right here attached to it, and that is to supposedly make it so as a single cylinder engine doesn't shake so much.
Why would you call supposedly?
Well, because they shake. They shake.
I think they
And that's,
tore the
you know,
motor
back
apart.
to the, you know, a more modern single-cylinder crankshaft would look very different than this, and it would have built-in counterweights. So it'd be balanced inside the engine, whereas in this case, the balancing was done outside the engine.
And it's not very good.
No, but, you know, considering you have this, you know,
Big heavy pistons, a lot of
you know,
movement.
so they
Lot of mass
do
movement.
okay, and I think in the collecting of rowboat motors, there are a variety of shakes. I think some of them seem to shake more than others, and I've seen, you know, a friend had a Lockwood Ash that to me shook a lot more than this Evenrude. So I think as far as single-cylinder rowboat motors, Evenrudes were probably not as bad as some. And so anyway, I think is that going to wrap this up, or do we need to?
Is there anything else you need to talk about on it? No, I think
so.
you
I
covered.
mean, this is a good example. It's got some features that are not original. You know, this knob is not the original one. The gas cap is not the original one.
Wait a minute. Do that again. You say, what did you say about the knob is not original?
Not original. It's a
Okay.
nice oldie, but it's not
Okay.
original. And the gas cap is definitely not an original one.
Okay.
Exhaust manifold is not original. It's much later.
But these items are things that would have broken and
Yeah,
been fixed
but-
by
yeah,
probably even a dealer at the time.
It could have.
People were expected to not, to repair
Yeah,
things.
so this exhaust is from a later one, and it's a water-cooled exhaust, whereas the original one to this engine was not water-cooled. So
Okay.
it's not quite hot.
Okay.
And this has extra silencing because the water goes into the exhaust and it kind of quiets it down a
Extra
little.
silencing. Oh.
Extra silencing.
No.
huh?
All right, thank you, Bill. Very,
Okay,
very
so I guess we'll
good.
wrap up this one. And,
Okay,
yeah.
good. All right,
All right.
so that's the end of our first What's Inside series.
All right.
Thank you, Bill. Very good. All right.